What if the person you trusted most was also your greatest fear? What if the walls of your own home, your sanctuary, became a stage for terror, betrayal, and unspeakable truths? Tonight, we unravel one of the most chilling and enigmatic cases in Canadian history, the story of Cindy James. For nearly 7 years, Cindy lived a waking nightmare, haunted by relentless threats, violent attacks, and a tormentor who seemed to know her every move. But here's the twist. Was Cindy truly the victim of a sadistic stalker, or could she have been the architect of her own suffering? The answers are as unsettling as the questions themselves. By the end of this video, you'll be left questioning everything you thought you knew about fear, trust, and the human mind. We'll dive into the evidence, dissect the contradictions, and confront the darkest corners of this unsolved mystery. But be warned, what you're about to hear will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Before we begin, I have one quick request. Did you know that most people who watch our videos aren't subscribed to this channel? If you're captivated by real-life mysteries that expose the darkest truths and leave you questioning reality itself, hit that subscribe button now. By subscribing, you'll ensure you never miss another story that could change the way you see the world forever. Now, let's begin. Prepare yourself. This is not just a story, it's a descent into a mystery so twisted it defies explanation. The story of Cindy James is one of the most perplexing and chilling mysteries in Canadian history. For nearly 7 years, Cindy endured a relentless campaign of harassment and terror. It began in 1982, just months after her divorce from Roy Makepeace, when she started receiving threatening phone calls. These calls were only the beginning. Over time, the harassment escalated to include disturbing notes left at her home, vandalism, and even physical attacks. Cindy's life became a waking nightmare as she reported nearly 100 incidents to the police, 5 of which involved violent assaults. Despite her numerous pleas for help, the authorities were unable to identify or apprehend a suspect. One of the most terrifying incidents occurred in January 1983. Cindy was discovered lying in a ditch 6 kilometers from her home, suffering from hypothermia and severe injuries. Her body was covered in bruises and cuts, and a nylon stocking had been tightly tied around her neck. She claimed she had no memory of how she ended up there or who had attacked her. This pattern of violence and intimidation continued for years, leaving Cindy increasingly isolated and fearful for her life. Friends and family watched helplessly as her mental health deteriorated under the weight of the ongoing torment. Despite the mounting evidence of harassment, doubts began to surface about Cindy's claims. Police investigations revealed inconsistencies that cast a shadow over her credibility. Some of the threatening phone calls were traced back to her own home, and fires that broke out in her residence were determined to have been started from inside. These findings led authorities to question whether Cindy might be orchestrating the incidents herself. However, those close to her, including her family and friends, rejected this notion. They believed she was the victim of a cunning and relentless stalker who was adept at evading detection. Cindy's behavior, however, became increasingly erratic as the years went on. She confided in friends about her fears, but refused to name any suspects, claiming that doing so would put their lives in danger. On one occasion, she awoke her friends Agnes and Tom after discovering a fire in her basement. When they rushed downstairs, they found the basement engulfed in flames. Strangely, there were no signs of forced entry, and Cindy's dog had not barked, a detail that further deepened the mystery. The psychological toll on Cindy was evident. She was admitted to a psychiatric hospital at one point after her doctor expressed concerns that she might be suicidal. On May 25, 1989, Cindy James disappeared under circumstances as baffling as the years of torment she had endured. Her car was found abandoned in a neighborhood parking lot, with groceries and a wrapped gift still inside. Bloodstains were discovered on the driver's side door, and some of Cindy's belongings were scattered beneath the vehicle. Despite an extensive search, there was no sign of her. For nearly 2 weeks, her family and friends lived in agonizing uncertainty, fearing the worst while clinging to the faint hope that she might still be alive. That hope was shattered on June 8, 1989, when Cindy's body was discovered in an abandoned house in Richmond. Her hands and feet were bound behind her back, and a nylon stocking was tightly wrapped around her neck. The scene appeared to be a clear case of homicide. However, the autopsy revealed a startling twist. Cindy had died from an overdose of morphine and other sedatives. This revelation raised disturbing questions about how she could have ingested the drugs and then managed to tie herself up in such a manner. Experts debated whether it was physically possible for her to have staged the scene alone, while others pointed to the meticulous nature of her bindings as evidence of foul play. The discovery of Cindy's body only deepened the mystery surrounding her life and death. The police concluded that she had likely taken her own life, theorizing that the years of harassment were a fabrication stemming from severe psychological distress. They suggested that Cindy had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to stage her death as a homicide. This conclusion, however, was met with fierce opposition from her family and friends, who insisted that Cindy had been murdered. Her father, Otto Hack, was particularly vocal, stating that the idea of his daughter tying herself up after ingesting a lethal dose of drugs was absurd. Adding to the controversy were the findings of a not-expert, Robert Chisnall, who demonstrated that it was technically possible for Cindy to have tied herself in such a way. This fueled speculation among investigators and the public alike. Was Cindy a deeply troubled woman who had constructed an intricate web of lies and ultimately staged her own death? Or was she the victim of a sadistic stalker who had managed to evade capture for years? The case became a media sensation, with reporters and true crime enthusiasts dissecting every detail in search of answers. The inquest into Cindy's death, held nearly a year later, offered little clarity. The jury ultimately ruled the cause of her death as undetermined, leaving both the suicide and homicide theories in limbo. This ambiguous conclusion did little to satisfy those who had followed the case closely. Cindy's sister, Melanie Hack, became an outspoken advocate for uncovering the truth, maintaining that her sister had been the target of a relentless campaign of terror that culminated in murder. She even created a website dedicated to Cindy's story, hoping to keep public interest alive and perhaps uncover new leads. Meanwhile, questions lingered about the role of law enforcement in the case. Critics argued that the police had failed Cindy by dismissing her claims as delusions and not taking her reports seriously enough. Others pointed out that the investigation had been exhaustive, with significant resources devoted to uncovering the truth. The RCMP reportedly spent over $1 million on the case, yet they were unable to definitively prove whether Cindy was a victim or a perpetrator of her own suffering. This failure highlighted the complexities of cases involving psychological trauma and potential stalking, where the line between reality and perception can become dangerously blurred. The years of torment Cindy endured left behind a trail of disturbing evidence that continues to haunt those who study the case. The threatening phone calls, the mutilated animals left on her property, and the physical attacks were documented extensively. Some incidents were even corroborated by witnesses, adding weight to her claims. Yet, the lack of concrete evidence pointing to a specific perpetrator left investigators at an impasse. The possibility that Cindy herself orchestrated these events remains a contentious theory, one that divides experts and true crime enthusiasts to this day. Forensic psychologists who have analyzed the case suggest that Cindy may have been suffering from a severe mental health condition, possibly dissociative identity disorder or a form of post-traumatic stress. They argue that her behavior, marked by paranoia, secrecy, and erratic actions, could be indicative of someone trapped in a cycle of self-inflicted harm and externalized fear. However, this explanation fails to account for the sheer complexity and scale of the incidents reported over the years. Could one person truly sustain such an elaborate campaign against themselves without leaving definitive proof? Or was there someone lurking in the shadows, exploiting Cindy's vulnerabilities to create an almost perfect crime? Cindy's personal relationships also came under scrutiny during the investigation. Her ex-husband, Roy Makepeace, was an early suspect due to the timing of the harassment, which began shortly after their divorce. Cindy herself had implied that Roy might be involved, though she never explicitly accused him. Police questioned him extensively, and while he denied any involvement, some found his behavior suspicious. He reportedly sent Cindy an audio recording of threatening phone calls he claimed to have received, which only added to the confusion. Was this an attempt to deflect suspicion, or was he genuinely a victim of the same tormentor? Despite these suspicions, no concrete evidence ever linked Roy to the harassment or Cindy's death. Friends and family described him as controlling during their marriage, but they were divided on whether he was capable of such calculated cruelty. The lack of resolution in this aspect of the case mirrored the broader uncertainty surrounding Cindy's story. Every lead seemed to spiral into more questions than answers, leaving those who knew her grappling with a mix of grief, frustration, and lingering doubt about what truly happened during those harrowing 7 years. The physical evidence surrounding Cindy's death only deepened the enigma. The nylon stocking tied around her neck was consistent with previous attacks she had reported, but its presence raised troubling questions. If Cindy had indeed staged her own death, how could she have managed to bind her hands and feet so securely? Experts debated whether the level of precision required was achievable without assistance. Additionally, the overdose of morphine and sedatives in her system suggested a deliberate act, yet the timeline of events leading to her death remained unclear. How long had she been at the abandoned house? And why had no one noticed her earlier? The location where Cindy's body was found also added an eerie layer to the case. The abandoned house was in a suburban area, yet no witnesses came forward to report seeing anything unusual in the days leading up to the discovery. This lack of sightings fueled speculation that Cindy may have been moved there after her death, possibly by someone attempting to stage the scene. However, without forensic evidence to support this theory, it remained just one of many unanswered questions. The ambiguity surrounding these details left investigators and the public alike grasping for a narrative that could make sense of such a bizarre and tragic story. Cindy's case also highlighted the limitations of law enforcement when dealing with prolonged harassment and psychological trauma. Despite her repeated pleas for help, the police were unable to provide her with adequate protection or identify a suspect. Some critics argue that the authorities dismissed her claims too quickly, labeling her as unstable rather than taking her reports seriously. This skepticism may have contributed to the lack of progress in the investigation, leaving Cindy increasingly isolated and vulnerable. On the other hand, some investigators maintained that they did everything possible given the circumstances, pointing to the extensive resources allocated to the case. The public fascination with Cindy's story has persisted for decades, fueled by its unresolved nature and the chilling details surrounding her death. True crime enthusiasts often debate whether Cindy was a victim of systemic failure or a deeply troubled individual who orchestrated her own suffering. The case has inspired books, documentaries, and online forums where theories abound. Some believe that Cindy's tormentor was someone close to her, possibly an ex-partner or acquaintance who knew how to exploit her vulnerabilities. Others argue that she may have been battling inner demons, creating a narrative of persecution as a way to cope with her mental health struggles. One of the most haunting aspects of Cindy's story is the sheer number of unanswered questions that remain. How could someone endure nearly 7 years of harassment without leaving behind definitive evidence of the perpetrator? If Cindy was indeed the architect of her own torment, what drove her to such extremes? And if she was a victim, how did her stalker manage to evade capture for so long? These questions have kept the case alive in public memory, serving as a chilling reminder of how fragile the line between reality and perception can be. Cindy's family has never wavered in their belief that she was murdered. Her father, Otto Hack, remained vocal about his dissatisfaction with the police investigation until his death. He believed that Cindy's death was the result of a systematic failure to protect her from a real and present danger. Her sister Melanie continues to advocate for justice, maintaining that the evidence points to foul play rather than suicide. For them, Cindy's story is not just a mystery, but a tragedy compounded by the inability of those in power to provide her with the safety and support she so desperately needed. The psychological toll of Cindy's ordeal is another layer of the tragedy that cannot be overlooked. Over the years, she became increasingly withdrawn, her once vibrant personality overshadowed by fear and paranoia. Friends described how she would check her surroundings obsessively, constantly looking over her shoulder as if expecting an attack at any moment. Her home became a fortress, with additional locks and security measures that did little to ease her anxiety. Despite these precautions, the harassment continued, as though her tormentor was always one step ahead. Cindy's mental health deteriorated further when the police began to question her credibility. The insinuation that she might be fabricating the incidents left her, feeling isolated and betrayed by the very system she had turned to for help. This skepticism from law enforcement only deepened her sense of helplessness, creating a vicious cycle of fear and doubt. Whether Cindy was a victim of external forces or her own mind, the lack of validation from authorities undoubtedly compounded her suffering, leaving her trapped in a reality where safety seemed unattainable. The physical attacks Cindy endured were perhaps the most terrifying aspects of her ordeal. On multiple occasions, she was found injured and disoriented, with no memory of what had happened to her. The injuries were often severe: bruises, cuts, and strangulation marks that seemed impossible for her to inflict on herself. These incidents lent credibility to her claims of being stalked and attacked, yet they also raised questions about how someone could repeatedly evade detection while carrying out such violent acts. The lack of witnesses or concrete evidence left investigators at a loss, further complicating an already baffling case. One particularly chilling incident involved Cindy being discovered in a ditch several kilometers from her home. She was wearing a man's glove and boot, and a nylon stocking was tied tightly around her neck. Her body was covered in cuts and bruises, and she was suffering from hypothermia. Cindy claimed to have no memory of how she ended up there, but the scene was eerily similar to the circumstances of her eventual death. This pattern of violence and amnesia created an unsettling sense of inevitability, as though Cindy's life was spiraling toward a tragic conclusion that no one could prevent. The involvement of private investigator Ozzy Caban brought a new dimension to Cindy's efforts to protect herself. Hired after she felt the police were not taking her claims seriously, Ozzy became one of Cindy's most trusted allies. He provided her with a two-way radio for emergencies and frequently checked in on her. On one occasion, Ozzy rushed to Cindy's home after hearing strange noises over the radio. He found her unconscious, with a knife stabbed through her hand and a threatening note pinned beneath it. Despite such alarming incidents, Ozzy admitted that Cindy was often evasive when asked for details, leaving him unsure of the full story. Cindy's evasiveness only added to the skepticism surrounding her case. Investigators and even some friends began to question why she refused to name her alleged stalker, despite claiming to know who it was. Cindy reportedly told her family that revealing the identity of her tormentor would put their lives at risk, a statement that further muddied the waters. While some interpreted this as evidence of genuine fear, others saw it as an attempt to divert suspicion. The conflicting narratives only deepened the mystery, making it nearly impossible to discern fact from fiction in Cindy's tragic story. The skepticism surrounding Cindy's case wasn't limited to law enforcement. Some of her Friends and colleagues began to question the plausibility of her claims. They struggled to reconcile the bizarre and violent nature of the incidents with Cindy's refusal to provide clear details or name a suspect. Her behavior, at times, seemed contradictory, like walking her dog alone late at night despite claiming to live in constant fear. These inconsistencies fueled speculation that Cindy might have been fabricating at least some of the events, either as a cry for help or as part of a deeper psychological struggle. However, others who knew Cindy well rejected the idea that she was capable of such deception. They pointed to her visible injuries, the threatening notes, and the mutilated animals left on her property as evidence that she was being targeted by someone with malicious intent. To them, Cindy's reluctance to name her stalker wasn't an admission of guilt, but a sign of how terrified she was. Whether out of fear for her own life or concern for the safety of her loved ones, Cindy carried the burden of her torment largely in silence, leaving those around her to piece together a puzzle with too many missing pieces. The timeline of Cindy's harassment was marked by a chilling escalation in both frequency and severity. What began as disturbing phone calls soon evolved into physical violence and psychological warfare. Rocks were thrown through her windows, her porch lights were smashed, and obscene notes were left on her doorstep. Cindy's sense of safety was completely eroded, and even moving to a new home or changing her last name failed to deter her tormentor. The relentless nature of the attack suggested a stalker who was not only persistent, but also deeply fixated on causing her harm. Despite these efforts to protect herself, Cindy's attempts to regain control over her life often seemed futile. Her decision to hire private investigator Ozzy Caban was a desperate bid for safety. Yet even his involvement couldn't prevent the attacks from continuing. The terrifying consistency of the harassment left Cindy trapped in a cycle of fear and uncertainty. Whether it was finding strangled animals in her yard or waking up to discover herself injured and disoriented, the pattern of violence appeared designed to break her spirit entirely. Each new incident served as a grim reminder that Cindy's nightmare was far from over. The escalation of Cindy's harassment followed a pattern eerily consistent with cases of stalking documented by experts. What started as unsettling phone calls quickly progressed to acts of vandalism, physical attacks, and psychological intimidation. The stalker's behavior seemed calculated to instill fear and maintain control over Cindy's life, leaving her in a constant state of vigilance. Dead animals were left on her property, obscene notes appeared on her doorstep, and her phone lines were repeatedly severed. Each incident reinforced the sense that Cindy was being watched, hunted even, by someone who seemed to know her every move. Cindy's attempts to escape the harassment proved futile. She moved houses multiple times, changed her last name, and even painted her car to avoid recognition. Yet, the attacks continued unabated, as though her tormentor was always one step ahead. The relentless nature of the harassment suggested an individual with an obsessive fixation on Cindy, someone who was willing to go to extreme lengths to ensure she never felt safe. This chilling persistence raised questions about the stalker's identity and motives, questions that remain unanswered to this day. The police's growing skepticism about Cindy's claims reached a peak after a series of incidents that seemed almost theatrical in nature. One such event involved Cindy being found unconscious in her garage with a nylon stocking tied tightly around her neck. She claimed she had been attacked by two men who dragged her into the garage, slashed her with a sharp object, and strangled her until she passed out. However, the wounds were mostly superficial, and there was no evidence to support her account of being sexually assaulted with a knife, as she had suggested. The lack of corroborating evidence led investigators to question whether the attack had been staged. Cindy's credibility took another hit when she failed 2 polygraph tests administered during the investigation. Although lie detector results are not admissible in court and are not entirely reliable, they added to the doubts surrounding her story. To make matters worse, Cindy's behavior often contradicted her claims of living in constant fear. For example, she was known to walk her dog alone late at night, an action that seemed at odds with someone who felt they were being relentlessly stalked. These inconsistencies created a divide between those who believed Cindy was a victim and those who suspected she might be fabricating the incidents for reasons unknown. The case's most baffling aspect was the sheer complexity of the harassment Cindy reported. Experts in criminal psychology have noted that stalking cases often involve a pattern of control and intimidation, but Cindy's ordeal seemed to defy typical profiles. The variety of methods used, threatening calls, physical attacks, vandalism, and even arson, suggested either a highly resourceful individual or multiple perpetrators working in tandem. Yet despite the extensive police investigation, no suspects were ever identified and no concrete evidence pointed to an external stalker. This lack of resolution only deepened the mystery surrounding Cindy's life and death. Cindy's mental health became a focal point for investigators and psychologists alike. Some theorized that her behavior might be indicative of Munchausen syndrome or another psychological disorder that drove her to fabricate the harassment as a way to seek attention or sympathy. Others argued that she could have been experiencing a dissociative state brought on by severe trauma, causing her to unconsciously create scenarios in which she was the victim. However, these theories failed to account for the physical injuries and corroborated incidents that seemed beyond Cindy's ability to stage on her own. The duality of her case, a blend of verifiable danger and inexplicable inconsistencies, left even seasoned professionals at a loss for answers. As Cindy's mental health deteriorated, her relationships with those closest to her began to fray. Friends who had initially supported her claims grew weary of the constant fear and confusion surrounding her life. Some distanced themselves, unable to reconcile the bizarre nature of the incidents with Cindy's refusal to provide clear answers. Even her family struggled to understand the full extent of what she was going through. While they believed she was a victim, they couldn't ignore the inconsistencies in her behavior, which often left them questioning what was real and what might have been imagined. The mounting isolation only seemed to exacerbate Cindy's paranoia and fear. She became increasingly withdrawn, avoiding social situations and spending more time alone. Her home became a fortress, with locks on every door and windows covered to prevent anyone from looking inside. Despite these precautions, the harassment continued unabated, as though her tormentor was always watching, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. Cindy's life became a tragic cycle of trying to protect herself while simultaneously feeling powerless against an enemy she couldn't identify or escape. Cindy's disappearance in May 1989 marked the beginning of the case's most chilling chapter. When her abandoned car was found in a neighborhood parking lot, it painted a grim picture. Blood smeared on the driver's side door and personal belongings scattered beneath the vehicle suggested a struggle. Inside, groceries and a wrapped gift sat untouched, as though Cindy had been interrupted during an ordinary errand. The scene raised immediate concerns among her family and friends, who feared that the years of harassment had finally culminated in something far more sinister. The discovery of her body 2 weeks later confirmed their worst fears, but provided few answers. Found in an abandoned house with her hands and feet bound and a nylon stocking around her neck, Cindy's death appeared at first to be a clear case of homicide. However, the autopsy revealed high levels of morphine and sedatives in her system, leading investigators to theorize that she had overdosed before being tied up. This conclusion sparked heated debate among experts, as many questioned whether it was physically possible for Cindy to have staged such an elaborate scene after taking a lethal dose of drugs. The official conclusion that Cindy's death was likely a suicide did little to settle the controversy. Her family vehemently rejected the idea, pointing to the bindings on her hands and feet as evidence that someone else had been involved. Her father, Otto Hack, publicly criticized the police investigation, accusing them of failing to protect Cindy and dismissing crucial evidence. To him, the notion that Cindy could have tied herself up after ingesting a fatal dose of drugs was not only implausible, but insulting to her memory. The jury's final ruling of undetermined only deepened the sense of injustice felt by those who loved her. Even today, Cindy's case remains a haunting enigma. True crime enthusiasts and investigators continue to debate whether she was a victim of a sadistic stalker or her own troubled mind. The lack of definitive answers has turned her story into a cautionary tale about the complexities of mental health, the limitations of law enforcement, and the devastating impact of unresolved trauma. Cindy's life and death are a reminder of how easily someone can slip through the cracks, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and lingering unease. The legacy of Cindy James's case lies not only in its unanswered questions, but in the broader implications for how society handles cases of stalking and psychological distress. Her story highlights the challenges faced by victims who cannot produce tangible evidence of their suffering, leaving them vulnerable to skepticism and dismissal. It also underscores the importance of a coordinated approach between law enforcement and mental health professionals, particularly in cases where the line between victimization and self-harm is blurred. Cindy's ordeal serves as a stark reminder that the systems meant to protect individuals can sometimes fail them in their most desperate moments. For her family, the pain of losing Cindy has been compounded by the lack of closure. Her sister Melanie continues to advocate for justice, maintaining a website dedicated to keeping Cindy's story alive and seeking new information. The case has inspired countless theories, from the possibility of an unknown stalker to more complex ideas involving multiple perpetrators or even institutional failures. Yet, despite decades of speculation and investigation, the truth about what happened to Cindy James remains elusive. Her story endures as one of Canada's most haunting unsolved mysteries, a chilling testament to the fragility of safety and trust in an unpredictable world. The unanswered questions surrounding Cindy's death continue to haunt those who have studied her case. Was she truly the victim of a sadistic stalker who managed to evade justice? Or was her torment a manifestation of deep psychological wounds? The lack of definitive evidence has left both possibilities equally plausible, creating a story that is as tragic as it is perplexing. Cindy's life, marked by fear and isolation, serves as a stark reminder of how complex and fragile the human experience can be when faced with relentless adversity. As time passes, the mystery of Cindy James remains frozen in public memory, a case that defies easy explanation. Her story has become a symbol of unresolved trauma and the limitations of systems designed to protect those in need. Whether viewed as a victim of external violence or internal struggles, Cindy's legacy is one that continues to provoke thought and debate. It stands as a chilling testament to the enduring impact of unanswered questions and the human need for closure in the face of tragedy. Cindy James's death remains one of the most perplexing, unsolved mysteries in Canadian history. Her case, marked by nearly 7 years of reported harassment, physical attacks, and psychological torment, continues to provoke debate and speculation. Despite extensive investigations by the RCMP and the involvement of private investigators, no definitive evidence ever surfaced to confirm whether Cindy was the victim of a relentless stalker or if she orchestrated the incidents herself. The lack of resolution has turned her story into a chilling enigma that blurs the line between victimization and psychological distress. The circumstances surrounding her death on June 8, 1989, only deepened the mystery. Found hogtied with a nylon stocking around her neck and high levels of morphine and sedatives in her system, Cindy's death was officially ruled as caused by an unknown event. While some experts demonstrated that it was possible for her to have staged her own death, Others pointed to the bindings and injuries as evidence of foul play. The conflicting theories have left Cindy's case frozen in ambiguity, a haunting reminder of how complex and fragile the search for truth can be in cases involving trauma and unresolved questions. Was Cindy James the victim of a sadistic tormentor, or was she battling demons within her own mind? The truth remains as elusive as ever, leaving us with one haunting question. What really happened during those 7 years of terror? Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think? Share your theories or thoughts about Cindy's case in the comments below. Your perspective could shed new light on this chilling mystery. If you enjoyed exploring this unsettling story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. By doing so, you'll never miss our deep dives into the world's most baffling and terrifying mysteries. And before you go, check out the next video that's about to pop up on your screen. It's another case that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about reality. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious and stay safe. I'm Jack, signing off. Did you like this conclusion, or would you like me to adjust anything? Let me know.